Hello and welcome to Something Inventive. On this episode, we'll be talking about online security, and we have special guest, Seb Kinnaird. You might recognize the name there. Seb is actually my brother, and he'll be helping me walk through the wild world of security. Hello, Seb.
Hello.
I'm glad to have you on, finally. It's been about 3 years since we started.
It's been a while.
It has. This episode is also sponsored by Inventive People, where you can hire the right person for your next creative project. More about that later. So, Seb, well, I know a lot about you being your brother, but perhaps you'd like to tell everyone a little bit about your history.
Certainly. So I've been in IT for nearly 20 years, and since 2005, that's been dedicated to working in security. So I started off with what they call network security. So that's firewalls, web proxies, how we control traffic into and out of an organization. Essentially, so ever since then, it's been helping organizations, large and small, including some public sector organizations, to help protect them from hackers. In many ways, help them get more organized. There's a lot of companies and organizations that try to be more secure, but they'll focus on buying the latest bits of kit, nice flashy lights, quite expensive. But if they skimp on the basics, then they will quite likely still potentially be in the news. So it's always key to focus on the basics, make sure you know what your assets are, making sure you know that you've got basic logging in place, that you're scanning for vulnerabilities, make sure that they can't be exploited, make sure you've got basic endpoint, so protection, so antivirus, deployed, but key. If you don't know what your assets are, you don't know what's in your environment, then you don't know what you need to protect.
Yeah, and do you think it's getting more complicated over the time since when you first started in IT all those years ago and moving forward, that security complexities have grown at all?
Definitely. Although it is, in the past few years, obviously, because various hacks and corporate breaches have made the public news, there is a lot more investment. A large number of companies have a lot of legacy environments for one or another reason. It's especially where they're a large bank, to the systems in place to help do your bank transfers, what you consider your day-to-day tasks that you'd expect from a bank, often run on some very old systems.
Yeah.
And they're left old because no one wants to touch them because they don't want things to break. And then if things break, people can't withdraw their money, etc., etc.
I know, wasn't there a bank recently, was it Halifax or Barclays, where they tried to overhaul their network and everyone... It stopped access for everyone, and they had
a TSB. So the Lloyd's and TSB had demerged essentially. So TSB was acquired by a Spanish company, and they tried to modernize their IT infrastructure, maybe a little bit too quickly, and then that broke things for quite a while, and that caused a lot of noise in the press due to IT.
Yeah, so it's not easy even for the big companies.
No, the problem with a lot of things, you will only find out certain things once you do that change. Because of the problems that with things like this, no one wants to be in the news for any reason, whether it is a hack or whether it is just your IT systems have gone down to stop your customers from being able to do what they need to do. No one wants that. So a lot of companies become very risk averse, and that because of that, and there's no changes. So no IT changes, and sometimes you're running systems that are decades old, well out of support from their manufacturers. So they're no longer being maintained and packed by the software or hardware vendor. There's only a defined limit that they can support it. But then if they're not being supported, then sometimes also some of these systems, the people that used to know how to run it have since long gone, and because people don't know what those systems are doing, they don't know how to manage it, they just leave them there. But then that leads us to some of the problems we have today.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, what prompted me to talk about this topic and get you on for this episode is an article I read from a guy called Sean Kuntz, trying to figure out how to pronounce his name. It's spelt Coonce. And actually, one of the things he said was that he never took his online security seriously because he'd never experienced an attack. And I think that's some of the problems with these banks, is that they leave things as they are because it's fine. They don't really want to change anything in case that introduces more issues. But let me share the article so people can see it. So this is on 9to5Mac. This looks like it's on Medium, actually. For some reason, the URL is different at the top. So basically, I read this article, and it's about a guy called Sean, and he had a lot of Bitcoin, $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, and it was stolen in a SIM port attack. Now, I'm going to give you a brief idea of what that is. Seb, please correct me. Someone managed to contact his phone company and get a new SIM card sent to them so they could put into a phone. And once they have that SIM card, a lot of companies use your mobile phone to send you a text as what they call second factor authentication. So they ask for your username, your password, and they'll send you a text to your phone so they can you can then put that code back into the website. Well, if you can get access to someone's phone or a SIM, which you can put into your own phone, then you have access to that second factor. So what they then did is to request access to his email account. Google then sent a second factor code to his mobile device. He had access to that mobile phone or the mobile phone number, and then put that code back into Google and gained access. And once you have access to the primary email account, you can gain access to lots of other services, including his Bitcoin account. Does that sound roughly right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Although I would say historically, this type of attack is particularly pertinent around in the US because the telecoms companies do not have the same level of control as stipulated
by
a lot of European governments. So this whole process of being able to simply phone up a telephone company and get them to change the details seems a lot easier to do in the US.
Really? That's
I'm not
crazy.
saying it wouldn't happen over here. However, it's most of the cases of this type of thing seem to be coming out of the US.
Okay, so actually it's less of an issue, but he did have some good points in this article, which are things he realized after the event that really should have put him on a higher alert. And I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but he gives some quite good details of the attack. He's got some illustrations here explaining how it went, including, if I scroll down a little bit, including the full timeline. And including his comments as well, saying at what point he should have really realized something was going on. And I thought this was quite interesting because there was a point recently where I was getting password prompts coming back up on my machine for email and a few other services, all related to Google. And we tie Google into a lot of our services because it's part of G Suite, so it's part of our company identity. And actually I was thinking back to this article, I was getting a couple of these coming up. So that prompted me to really a little bit more concerned about why this is happening rather than just blindly typing in my password again, and to actually look at maybe logging out other devices, going through and resetting passwords and making sure that if someone had got access and that access has been sort of really pared back and then restricted again and made more difficult. It didn't turn out to be that. It was just a regular reset as Google does, but maybe I was on a bit of higher alert after reading this article.
I would say though, for anyone who reads this type of thing, there's the concept in security of defense in depth. So the more security layers you can have, the more difficult it will be for someone to be able to compromise your account, whether that's an email account, your bank account, your corporate network, etc. So having these multiple layers is definitely beneficial. So even though with this person here had SIM port attack enabled someone to redirect the two-factor authentication messages which were sent to his mobile phone, that's another jump that you're making an attacker have to go through. So without any two-factor authentication, this would have been a lot easier. I think generally the way that the larger companies, whether Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Google, etc., they treat two-factor authentication fairly well. They try and make it as easy as they can. Anyone, you don't need to be technical to work with it. It should be relatively straightforward. Generally, for a lot of people, they can log into a website. It says, you haven't visited us from this browser you're using before, therefore we'll just quickly double check and we'll send them a text message to a device that you've already used to log in within the past. And that extra step is quite beneficial. So with Google, Facebook, etc., they often provide ways and show, look, we've detected that someone trying to log into your account from this location. Was it you? You can quite quickly click yes or no. And then that helps them work through their systems. They see that you log in frequently from different areas. Then they'll not prompt you in future, but they'll just update their system. They don't want to irritate you by giving you constant security prompts because that doesn't help anyone. It just makes people want to turn these security controls off. But it just helps their systems. And then, but if you quickly say, actually, no, that was not me, then that helps you because you know someone's trying to log in without your authorization, but it's also helping them. They'll know, right, this particular location this person was trying to log in from wasn't authentic. Therefore, they can apply additional security measures if someone's trying to use that same process again.
Yeah, I guess they might be using other methods such as like looking at the IP, looking at the patterns on that particular, the data coming in from that account and using that to help understand whether it's a more legitimate use.
The IP address, the type of browser you're using, where you're coming from, time of day. There's all sorts of potential controls, and these are not just applied by the big tech companies. Visa and MasterCard do the same, so you've got the verified by Visa process, for instance.
That is annoying, though. I don't like verified.
Well, that's a risk-based approach, so very similar in the sense that if I was trying to pay with something using Visa on a machine that I use day in, day out, and a location that I'm normally in, it wouldn't come up. However, if I went to a different country or if I used a different machine, then it would prompt. So it's working in exactly the same way, using these sort of risk-based controls.
Yeah.
But agreed, sometimes that can be difficult. But then that's an issue for Visa and MasterCard to fix. It's, with just those two companies, it's things are improving.
Yeah, they are slightly. Just something you said about time of day as well. Something that this guy Sean he should have twigged at the time is that this attack was happening to him at 10 at night. So that is a time where people are going to be tired. They're going to be more receptive to like just saying, yeah, that's fine, let things happen, or not worrying about it, or maybe even be asleep at the time to allow this to happen. So actually the attack was going on when most people, when he was like to be asleep or not paying attention to his identity being sort of shifted around. There is one comment I thought was quite good, which I'll scroll to at the end. Let me see if I can find it. He says he can't stop thinking about the small, easy things he could have done to protect himself along the way. And I think this is what captures a lot of people. I never took my online security that seriously because I'd never experienced an attack. And I think that's the same for a lot of people. Until you have a problem, when you would have done anything and paid anything to get it sorted, if you had almost thought about, well, what if this attack happens? What if I need protection from hackers? What if I need to protect against me being unavailable to give my password out to people? I need to look after my passwords even if I'm not available to use them. I think that's worth thinking about, going through a disaster recovery process or disaster planning process. Think about the worst case, but no one likes to do that and that sort of stuff. Why do they want to talk about security?
But the same thing applies in the offline world, completely away from the internet. For instance, you may have a nice house in a nice neighborhood and thinking, this is fine. You tend to leave your back door unlocked or your shed unlocked. It's only once something gets stolen, you go, maybe it's not so nice after all. People will target it as well. So there'll be people who will target particular areas because for that very reason, because it's seen as an easier route to get to something that they desire. So you get the same in the online world as well. So there are some people who will target specific companies knowing that they might have access to quite sensitive information, something quite valuable, but they might be too small that they just don't have the same level of focus. So for example, a very small company who works in the defense industry might have some contracts with some large companies, and has even been attacked in the past where, for a major US defense contractor, attackers knew that they wouldn't be able to get into that defense company very easily. So what they did is compromise a small nursery school very close to the employer, where a lot of the employees went and took their children before going into the office. And because it was local to the office, the employees were able to persuade the IT and the defense company to then say, look, we want to look at the webcams in this nursery school so we can see how our children are doing during the day. So they allowed access to that. And then that was ultimately the way to then get into the organisation. People are very crafty and they will do what they can to get access to a particular target, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly through a third party like that.
Yeah, and I guess if you're a high level target, there are layers of difficulty that you want to put in place to make sure it's difficult for people to get to. Most people aren't going to be a target, but sometimes they could be. It could be an automated target. I know certainly in terms of websites, had clients where websites have been hacked. They think, why are we being targeted? It's not necessarily anything specific about that company. It's just an automated target. There's a vulnerability found, and then we have to clean up the mess by finding out, putting things back right again. Usually can't find out what the vulnerability was. By the time the hack's been put in place, there are tons of vulnerabilities on there, so it's find out what the reason was. But it's usually no reason for it. It's just either someone just trying to hack it for fun. They may be trying to get information in there, or they just want to put pages on there so that they can get Google ranking up for other websites they're trying to promote. There's usually no reason for it. Often it's just to see if people can.
And sometimes these can be very quick. Pure IT space, some people may have heard of companies like AWS, Amazon Web Services. Yeah. So if you can host your all sorts of services, you can host a website, host your email platform, but you can have that. You have something called access keys. But these access keys have been, your code repository where you put your software code might be GitHub. So people have AWS access keys stored in GitHub. Now, typically your GitHub file will be set to private, which means no one else can read it. Sometimes people accidentally, they're doing something in a rush, potentially at the end of the day, or because they're getting shouted at by a manager, and they'll accidentally make that particular code public. And I've seen cases where, literally within seconds, someone's been able to, it's gone public, scan it, find out these access credentials, then be able to log into the AWS account, and then they'll be spinning up a vast range of services within Amazon Web Services, potentially running crypto mining, things like that. So that's mining for cryptocurrency. So if you want to create a large amount of Bitcoin quite easily, for example, or another cryptocurrency, then this is often a common method, and you can do it so quickly. Once you've got access to their AWS accounts, obviously not you paying the bill anymore, it's that company that you've been able to compromise their AWS environment. It's so quick to do, and this is literally within seconds, that you can spin up hundreds of machines immediately after you've been able to get their access keys from GitHub, and that's reasonably common, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's the same I've seen with hacks on websites. The moment usually there's a vulnerability and it's found, then you'll get other things piling on top of that, and it happens very quickly. Yeah, and it's in their interest to do it quickly, because they might be detected by the owner of the account, but also Amazon might detect the fraudulent use of the account and shut it down. So they need to make hay while that sun is shining. Just moving back, there was another article that you mentioned from a guy called Matt Honan.
That's right.
Put it up on screen. This happened a couple of years ago. Was it 2012? Actually, yeah. But this is very similar to the Sean article I mentioned, and this is titled "How Apple and Amazon Security Flaws Led to My Epic Hacking." I think this is a sadder story in many ways, because it led to loss of lots of personal items. So it wasn't just money, which the other guy could make back, or despite it being a lot of money, he could make it back again. With Matt, he lost a lot of personal photos and things dear to him, which you can't get back. So it's very much a story of the same sort of. Actually, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this story?
Sure. So this is essentially how this Matt Honan, he was originally targeted purely because people wanted to get access to his Twitter handle, which is @MAT, and that's it. People thought it was nice and short and sweet. That was the original target, or the reason for why he was compromised. But they were able to get access into his Gmail account, I believe. They were able to get the last 4 digits of his credit card. With that, they were then able to get access to his Amazon account, reset his Amazon account. And the reason Apple are implicated in this, because they also got access to his iCloud account, which then meant they wiped all his devices.
I know.
And he didn't, I think he had backups, but they were a year ago or something. And within that year, he'd had a new baby daughter, and all his photos for that year were lost. Ben said it was a very personal thing that he lost, and he had no way of getting them back. And this is all because people wanted access to his short Twitter handle.
This wasn't the fault of any companies involved, really, certainly Apple or Amazon. It was just a case of him not putting those extra layers in place.
You could both Apple and Amazon did have flaws that made this easier to exploit, and they both updated their processes afterwards.
Yeah.
So they were partly culpable in this, but as is Matt Honan, but he quite freely admits it in this article. So he's a journalist for Wired, so he had quite a large online persona, and obviously had a large number of followers on his Twitter account, and because of that, he became the target.
And I guess, yes, he could have done more, but so could Apple and Amazon. They have done now. And let's be clear, this attack wasn't just a purely digital attack. This required someone contacting Amazon and Apple directly on. I think it was on the phone. This isn't just a script that's running in the background that takes ownership and control. This is someone on the telephone orchestrating this.
Multiple attack vectors in the terminology we use in the security industry. So it was very much a well-rehearsed as well. So if you read the article, people had obviously done tests a little bit. They knew exactly what Amazon's processes were. They knew what Apple's processes were, and they knew what they needed to get to how to exploit it. So when they were able to start the initial compromise, the whole from start to finish was very, very quick, because they rehearsed it all the way through.
Well, I'm going to make sure those 2 articles are linked in there. I think it's worth a read, and not to scare people. It's just worth reading to make sure that if it just prompts you to check your own security, make sure that you have done as much as you can that isn't going to be awkward for you, that's something where it's going to give you a higher level of security, but something that you can manage on a day-to-day basis. It's definitely worth looking at. And saying that, something new that Apple are bringing out in their new operating system in the autumn is Sign In with Apple. And this is very similar to something that Google, Facebook, and Twitter, although you don't see the Twitter one so much, have already, which are buttons which people can use instead of creating a new account with an email with a username and password. You can actually just have a Google button or Facebook button on there where you can click on those and use your Google or Facebook credentials to log in, and then those details are passed back to the app or or system that you're using. And the benefit with those is that you can maybe have a stronger Google account. You can use your second factor authentication, and we'll talk a little bit about different ways of doing that later in the podcast. So you could use your Google account to authenticate for that particular app, and it means you've got one less thing to worry about. You just think about using one login, which I think it seems more straightforward.
Yep. And just to expand the terminology that Ben and I have been mentioning. So two-factor, multi-factor, second factor, different factors typically are something you know. So that would be your username and password. You know it's in your head. Another factor would be something you have. Now, this is where whether you've got a particular hardware device, your telephone is a second factor. Now, more and more commonly, it's something you are, which is biometrics. So whether that's using Face ID, Touch ID, etc., that's the biometric scan. So those are the three different types of factors. And the more factors you can layer together, then the stronger your overall security posture is.
Right. And I guess there may be other factors which we don't interact with, but they are to do with maybe time of day, location, and other things that can be taken into account, which aren't necessarily proof, but they can be used if you're operating outside of that. They can be used to help determine if it's not you.
Correct. And in large corporate networks, you might have a corporate laptop that's got a certificate installed on it. So that's something else, but that's what you have factor again. So whether it is your telephone or your laptop, but it's something that authenticates you, that helps companies and individuals help to secure their overall security posture, help to improve overall security posture.
Something I use to log into my Mac is my Apple Watch. Now, this is actually an old one. This is an original one.
I thought you were going to say your wedding ring. But...
yeah, I use my wedding band. So the Apple Watch is, great for many, many, many things. But one of the primary uses I have it for is it enables me to have a longer password on my Mac. That is something I can remember because I do still have to type it in from time to time. But the fact that I can just walk up to my Mac, wiggle the mouse, and it logs in by connecting to my Apple Watch is really beneficial for me. Obviously, the way you connect this is you have to log into this watch first. And if I take it off, it breaks connection. And it means that someone, if they just sort of steal this off my wrist and run away with it, it's going to be difficult for them to then try and unlock my Mac with it. Still not impossible. I'm sure there are ways, still difficult. But it allows you to have that convenience with security. There's a guy called Rene Ritchie, who I listen to a lot of podcasts, and he often says that security is really that balance between making easy and complex, because you can have a very long password that's going to take you ages to type, which is going to be more secure, or you can have a shorter one, which is more convenient, or maybe something like this, a token, which allows you to be represented. Anyway, we're going down a little bit of a tangent there, but thank you for clarifying some of those terms, Seb. Let me share my screen so people can see more about signing with Apple. And the reason I like it, I use a lot of Apple devices. I've got an Apple address or an Apple login. So for me, I'm quite happy, trusting of Apple in terms of how they manage my data. So I believe that they won't sell it, that they won't use it in the wrong way, and that they'll store it securely. So actually, if I have an Apple sign-in button on an app, then I'm likely to use that because it's nice and easy, that I'll be able to hit it, click on it, and it's going to send just the details that are needed. So diving into sign-in with Apple, one of the interesting features that they mentioned in the keynote is the ability to share your email address with the app that you're signing up for. Now, that's really useful for the app maker. That's great to have their email address. But one of the more unique areas of this, or elements of this, is that you can actually provide them with an email, but it's not your email. It's a special random email that Apple will generate on your behalf. They'll supply that to the app maker. And when the app maker sends an email to that random email, that will then forward on to you. So you've got this line of defense in between, which again is quite good. That helps protect you, because if that app maker's database is stolen and published on the internet, then the email that they're using is an Apple email and not your email. So that might help make it a bit more difficult for people to find out your details. But also it means that if you're not interested in signing up to their emails and they don't respond to their unsubscribe requests, you can actually cancel them from Apple and bin that off. And I thought that's quite an interesting idea. I know you've been doing something like that with Gmail, Seb.
Yeah, so that exists, and it's to add on to your point about it. So it helps from a privacy angle because the target website that you're trying to log in with doesn't get your actual email unless you authorize it. But it also helps with something called credential stuffing. So that's a security term, and historically, people in security haven't necessarily made things easy. People just resort to using the same username and password across multiple different websites. websites. So when one of these websites might get breached, they haven't protected their data very well, and it's quite easy to obtain the raw username and passwords that people use to log in. The credential stuffing is literally taking these credentials and then trying them on a whole wide array of other sites. And then, oh, actually, look, we've used the same username and password combination to now go in and access 10 or 15 other sites. So they can potentially get access to a lot more information, which they potentially use to either sell to other people, to blackmail you, if it's sensitive. Ultimately, it's a position that you don't really want to be in. So the more you can leverage technology companies' security capabilities, so whether it's Apple, Facebook, or Google, typically I'd recommend it because overall they do quite a good job. You are putting some trust in them, but ultimately it's better to trust one of those larger players than the security of a random website that you use to order a new toy for your child or something like that. There's so many websites, and a lot of people, they don't. A lot of them on these smaller sites, they might not have invested the time, potentially money, to help secure the website, all the data you're sending them. Your payment card data will typically be handled differently. There's something called the payment card industry data security standard, and that is basically makes it that's quite well regulated in order to make sure that people's credit card data or debit card data protected. But outside that, it's a bit of a wild west, and it completely depends on the website, on how they actually manage your data. So honestly, although you are giving a bit of trust to these large companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook, overall the security is a lot better, and it will hopefully make your lives a lot easier to help you improve your security.
So certainly, if you're concerned about other actors getting hold of your details, then signing up with those. Whether you trust what they're doing with the details is another matter, what Google and Facebook are doing with them, or even Apple. But yes, it is significantly better because they will have better security processes in place, and they'll be more at risk if they lose your data. Well, that's great. I'm just going to do a sponsor read now, if that's okay. And we're going to talk about Inventive People. Inventive People is a collective of creative, technical, and marketing folk that I've worked with over the last 9 years. And it can be a pain to find the right person for a small project, from deciding what you need to getting a cost and dealing with all the uncertainties of working with someone new. So to overcome this, we've put together 60 tasks or common marketing promotional elements. So you know the cost, how long it will take, what it is, and what isn't included, all before you agree to anything. So I'm just going to give you a quick demo. So we've got Inventive People open here. Let's say you wanted some proofreading done. So you've got an important document that's going out, maybe a pitch even. So you go into content writing. You find Louise here, my wife, as it happens, and it's clearly labeled with proofread a Word, PDF or PowerPoint file. So we can click into that. It says what is included and what isn't included. So in this case, Louise isn't going to go and fact find or research. She's not going to be rewriting or creating new copy from what you've already got. This is about proofreading. It's about taking something that is at its final stage and making sure it's spelt correctly. The grammar is right and the punctuation is right. And it basically is a consistent document. And it's actually quite reasonable at £35 for 10 pages. You can select a different amount of pages. Now, let's say we've got a document which is up to 10 pages. I can add that to our cart. That looks good. We go through to checkout, and I must remember to use the code Inventive Podcast to get my 20% discount. So let's put that in. Apply that, and we've got our discount. And that's it. You buy the item, and you're done. You'll be contacted by Louise, and you can continue as normal. It's nice and straightforward. So if you need that blog article written, some website updates, new star photos, or a case study video, check out inventivepeople.co.uk. And remember to make sure, as a listener to this podcast, that you use the code Inventive Podcast for 20% off your first order. Okay, moving on. Seb, are you able to offer some other tips for individuals or small businesses in terms of protecting their data online?
Certainly. So there's the key bits is typically passwords can be quite difficult. Historically, people in the security industry have not been very user friendly. We've told you, look, when you must log in, but you need a minimum of 8 characters, 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, and a special character, and it makes it really complicated. Oh, and to make it matters worse, you've got to change that every 30 days just because we like being mean. It's not very nice, really. It was perceived to be good from a security perspective because you come up with a load of random characters, it makes it more difficult. Ultimately, it didn't really work. One of the most common passwords for a long time, which met most of the complexity requirements in corporate environments, which is 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, and 1 number was password 1 with a capital P.
Yeah.
Meets all the complexity requirements. However, it's not a very good password because it's very common and it's very easy for companies. It's very easy for people who want to attack a particular target, whether that's an individual or a company, to then start off with the most commonly used passwords. And also some people, because they're told to change their passwords every 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is. Next time they need something, all right, password 2.
Yeah, you just keep adding a number or letter onto it.
Exactly. And then, but people would then potentially use their favourite football team, except for the year they were born. But generally, there's a lot of common factors and it makes it reasonably easy. So what a large number of people are choosing to do today is recommend a password phrase. So a collection of, say, 4 or 5 words. It doesn't have to be a sentence, so you don't need any joining words like and, etc. Just 4 or 5 phrases, 4 or 5 words that make up a phrase that they don't actually have to mean anything to you as long as you understand it. Then that together will be about, say, 20 characters, 25 characters. Generally, the longer the password is, the stronger it is. So if you want to add in any additional complexity, like making one of those words either start with a capital or end with a, then that's definitely possible. But ultimately, even if it was all lowercase, it would still be reasonably strong password if you had 4 or 5 quite strong passwords. There's something that you can put up in a link later on, but it's a XKCD it's a comic strip basically.
Oh, I'll find it, yeah.
Again, it's just a series of words that don't particularly mean anything, but it's something that you will probably likely remember, and actually that's a stronger password than password 1, password 2.
I found that example, and yeah, I'm showing on screen now, but they come up with the 4 random words. Correct horse battery staple. I think it's the password that they came up with. But yeah, it sounds like a really good idea. So I'll make sure that link is in the show notes.
But also utilize password managers are quite good because they can generate a truly random password that you don't need to remember. Therefore, the master password is important because if anyone gets access to your master password, they then have access to all those passwords. So you need to protect that. But whether that's protected, if you're using Apple Keychain, for example, then that's protected using your Apple ID. So as long as that's protected, then everything that's stored in your Apple Keychain is also protected. The same works with Google Chrome, for instance. So if you're an Android user or if you've got a Chromebook, then all your passwords that you store are protected by your Google account credentials. So as long as that's protected, then you're protecting a much larger list of passwords. These password generators are very good. So the current Apple standard is, I believe, 3 groups of 6 letters or
that's right,
letter number combinations with 2 dashes to separate the 3 groups. And so that's a total of 20 characters, completely randomized. No one's going to guess it. And you can just store that in your Apple Keychain for one particular website. Have another website, completely separate thing. And it just makes it easy. Going back to the comment earlier about how if one of these websites didn't store their information about you securely, then even if someone did get access to it, okay, they can now log in as you to this one specific account, but they can't reuse that for any other website.
Yeah, it's the reusing passwords that's a real issue. It's a good bit of software, actually, the keychain. It sits in the background. You don't really notice it there. It does generate, when you're signing up for new services, it generates the passwords as you described. They've also now changed Safari so that once a password is stored in there with the username, if you select that, so it'll usually come up with the default one that you use. If you just select that, it'll automatically log in. So it'll apply those details, and if it can, it'll automatically log in. So you can actually log in with one click normally. It's very swift, so long as you trust that access to your computer. Because obviously, if you can get access to someone's computer, then you've got to have a really strong password to be able to get in there, because once they've got access, then they've potentially got access to your passwords as well, or at least log into some of these services.
Exactly. And if you're a heavy user of Apple devices and you buy into their whole iCloud ecosystem, then it can sync everything across iCloud. Yes, myself as well. But it can sync everything across all your Apple devices. So I don't need to worry about having different password lists on my laptop, on my desktop, on my phone, my tablet. It all syncs together.
And that's something you feel comfortable with as a security consultant?
Yes, definitely. There's a large number of people in the security industry who decide to say they like the flexibility of Android. To be honest, I would say there's a large number of people in the security industry who actually do use Apple products, partly because they just want something that works, and they do also trust it. So Apple have gone on record to say, security and privacy are very key to them. They don't plan on selling anyone's data, etc. It's not in their business model. They don't make money off it. They don't need to make money off it because the money they make is off the devices and services that they sell anyway. So there's no business driver for them. So it's actually been potentially more of a marketing maneuver for them to say, look, because we're keen on privacy, we've got no reason to sell your data. Therefore, if you buy into the Apple ecosystem, then we will protect you and your identity and everything we hold. So that's been quite good for them. As a security consultant, I definitely believe that Apple do a very good job at protecting their environment.
I think they're also a big target. So because they're such a big company, they're under so much scrutiny for everything they do. I feel that it's very difficult for them to wiggle around and not do things in the right way. And then coming on the record and saying, we will not do these, for example, with the single sign-on button, saying that they will not sell your personal details. It's not in their interest to do so. I think those all rack up to make it. It's not that other companies won't be able to do that. It's just that it was very difficult for them to get away with any bad practices because they're in the limelight so much.
Correct. However, you've got some companies who are very large who do have very bad security practices sometimes in certain areas. So Facebook, for example, they have been not just selling data, the whole Cambridge Analytica element. Part of what Facebook does is very good. The sign-on with Facebook, I think there's a lot of security measures that have been put in place to try and make that whole process secure. Other parts of Facebook, as in Instagram, for example, were for quite a long period of time not encrypting any username and password, so people found them on the database with them. So certain practices just are good at Facebook, other practices not. So I think, and they seem to be getting away with it. Some people have been deleting their Facebook accounts, but overall, I think Facebook has still got a large number of active accounts, and I think some of the bad practices are not really changing their business model. So was Apple, because of partly because they market themselves as having good privacy policy, security policy, I think they are more on the hook if there was to be an issue. So then they're not alone. They have had security flaws that you still get there. Some of the software has vulnerabilities which get exploited. But then as soon as Apple discover that, they will fix it. That because they have used it as a marketing thing in the past. So people do expect a higher standard, and Apple will lose a lot of their loyal customer base if they don't start to if they lose that.
It hits them in the wallet, basically.
Yeah,
if they don't
exactly.
do it right. Your sort of top tips are: make sure your password is long, but it doesn't need to be complicated. It can just be some simple words strung together.
Correct.
And to use a password manager. Now, do you recommend any password managers?
1Password, LastPass, both quite good. They're both quite big. They're both multi-platform, Windows, Linux, Mac, Android.
Yeah,
they both work on all those platforms, and that certainly helps. And they're both pretty straightforward. I think both LastPass and 1Password have free versions as well, so you can try them out.
Yes, I know LastPass do. We use LastPass as a company. It was partially recommended by our editor's partner, who works in security, and he likes tinkering, that sort of stuff. So he recommended LastPass, but I think 1Password is just as good. Lots of people recommend that. And we use that from a business point of view. So we store a lot of client passwords where we need to access their services on their behalf. Obviously, we've collected them with their permission. They know it's being stored in there. One of the things we do is try not to store anything in there that doesn't need to be stored. If we can get it, or we can reset it, and we won't put it in there. But personally, I'll use the keychain. Apple's keychain works really, really well. In fact, should we go through a couple of the tools? There's lots of different tools that can be used in terms of protecting your privacy or security online. So what's the first one? So actually, LastPass, I'll bring that up. So this is LastPass. It's quite straightforward. Works nicely, as I said. It actually does fill out passwords for you online if you want to use it like that. We also have this added second factor authentication through LastPass, which is an app on your phone, got it on my iPhone, where if a service needs this second factor or two-factor authentication, you can use this app to generate that code. And it's usually, this little 6-digit code that will associate with your account. So when they ask for that, I can go to the app, and it's quite clever. When you come up with LastPass and it needs that authentication code, push notification to my phone, I can hit it, click verify, and then it tells the app immediately, been verified. It works really well. You can also use Google Authenticator. I believe they have basically the same sort of system.
As does Microsoft. So there's one of the benefits of the Microsoft Authenticator versus Google one is that you can back up all your codes to your Microsoft account. So
yes.
a lot of people have Google Authenticate, put in all our codes, but then if they lose their phone and need, it's a difficult process, more difficult than it should be.
It's a pain
to change with Google Authenticate. I think Google are working on improving that, but currently the Microsoft Authenticator works quite well.
Yeah, so I guess it depends what ecosystem you're in. I know LastPass allows it to back up to LastPass as well, so they've got a similar feature. I think I just wanted something independent, really, but that works quite nicely. There's something else I was going to say, but I can't remember what it was. It's not coming to me, so we'll just scrub that.
I would say another key thing though, do make, if there's anything, whether it's sentimental value, like we mentioned before, the passwords, the pictures of someone's children, like Matt Honan when he lost them, is very simple. He did have backups, but they were all attached to other Mac devices. So when they would compromise his iCloud account, they wiped all his Mac devices. So do keep a backup, but keep anything that's really sensitive, whether it's from a company's perspective or individually, keep backup. Ideally in a completely separate environment that's not connected to the internet would be good, and maybe even away from your main home. And that's just a general area. If you've got lots of backups, but it's all in your main house, and your house is then burgled or even worse, if there's a fire, you will lose everything. And that's, if there's something that's quite significant and terrible as that anyway, the last thing you want is then be, when you're trying to build everything back up, then have more problems because you lost all your backups as well.
Yes.
So having the backups there in the first place is good, but also test them, because some companies in Terra are quite bad and they will back up potentially for years and years. But then they'll realise at the worst possible moment when they're trying to restore from a backup that actually the process wasn't working and they weren't actually backing up anything at all because they weren't tested.
Well, I'll come back to that actually briefly, but the backup system we use, and I know we were talking about it earlier, is Backblaze. So this is something we use. I've got it running set to run at 6 o'clock every evening, and it will basically stream all of the data that's changed during the day up. I used to actually have it streaming live, so when any data was changing, it would go up, but I do so many video conference calls, it was just drowning my bandwidth. It wasn't very good. But this works really well. It's kind of my last line of defense, really, having that. I've also got Time Machine running, Time Machine backup running on my Mac. So that's running I think it's every hour, maybe every half hour. It should be picking up just the changes from that. And that's a good first dip if there's any issues. Every time I change operating system, I'll do a snapshot basically of the system and archive that. So that might be a year out of date, but again, that I guess is my last line of defense. It's there in case, so that can be quite useful. So yeah, Backblaze is a really good system. It's really cost effective. I mean, you're looking at less than £60 a year, protect something. I think there's a discount if you buy for 2 years, which is what I do. It's really worth doing. And there's no limit as well. That £60 a year is for each device, but there is no limit on what you back up. So it's good to put everything underneath that as well.
Found out about Backblaze because of one of their blog posts. They are quite transparent about how their backup operation works, the sort of testing they will do on all the hard drives that have to go in. And they do a lot of testing, performance testing, also making sure that the failure testing, obviously you want to run a backup operation like that if you have hard drives that fail a lot of the time. So they do a lot of testing. They're very transparent about the processes. So it was quite interesting to see, and it's just from an individual perspective to know that you're putting your money into a company that are actually going to take care of your critical information.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I can highly recommend them. Something else that might be useful for people is having a VPN, because it protects your security in a different way. So maybe if you are at a coffee shop and you aren't able to tether to your mobile phone, for example, and you need to use their Wi-Fi, but their Wi-Fi isn't security protected, which is unlikely nowadays, but it can happen. Then if you have a VPN, what that can do is it's a way of encrypting or protecting all of your traffic and then running it through a different pipe, so to speak, a different virtual pipe, so that people who are looking at that Wi-Fi can't actually see the traffic. It's in its own protected tunnel. Is that about right?
That's about right. So VPN, virtual private network, it is a encrypted link, so you cannot see. For case of public Wi-Fi, it's less of an issue nowadays because so many sites use HTTPS. So SSL/TLS, you may have heard those terms before. So, but because your traffic between your laptop, say, and the website is now encrypted, that means if someone else was connected to the same public Wi-Fi, they can't see that traffic, whereas previously they could. So there's less of a requirement nowadays for public Wi-Fi, but it's still good practice if you can make sure that all your traffic is encrypted using a VPN. And I know some people use VPNs, for example, when they're traveling, for instance, because certain services like iPlayer can only be viewed in the UK. So people will go, when they go abroad, they'll use a VPN which comes back to the UK, and then you can watch iPlayer while you're still on holiday. So a lot of people use it for that type of thing. Or to use, you're sat in the UK and you want to use services that are only available in the US, like Hulu, then you can use that same functionality.
Or if you just don't trust the network you're on, maybe everything is secure, they're using HTTPS, you just don't trust it. Then you can use a VPN to make sure that you're protected. You do have to trust the VPN, though. Obviously, they can potentially look at see all the traffic, and depending on how it's encrypted, they can maybe infer information as well. Very important that you know who the VPN provider is and what they're going to be doing with your data.
Going back to Facebook's bad practices, they actually acquired a VPN company.
They did, yes.
And then they were trying to get children to use this software by saying, look, it's free and we'll be able to give you access to additional services. But all the time they were using, because the VPN, all the traffic was then routing through Facebook's network, and Facebook are then doing more monitoring of what's going on. In general, you can have a Facebook account. Certainly, I've still got one. Facebook have quite a few unethical practices that I think they need to resolve.
They do. I'm not going to go into it now. It gets me angry. A VPN that I use, I've got it on screen. It's called TunnelBear, but they do have a free account where you can use 500 meg of data a month. So if you just need it temporarily, it can be quite useful just to have on your laptop if you're taking it out. Or sometimes if you need to test something, it can be really good. If you want to test how your website is being accessed from a different country, you can use TunnelBear, hop into the US or somewhere over in Europe, and you can then view your website and you'll see it from that point of view. So it's really good for testing language variations, automatic language variations. So that's free for 500 meg, really simple to use. There are obviously more advanced ones, but I'm not going to go into those. Something finally I want to touch on, I don't know how you feel about these, Seb, is ad blockers. So this is one from a guy called Dean Murphy, who actually I interviewed, I don't know when it was, last year at some point. Great guy. He's made this app called Crystal. So if you want to hear more about how he made that and how it came to be, I will make sure the link is in the show notes, but you can find that on our blog. But essentially what these do from an Apple point of view, and this one works on Google Play as well, is that they will block various things like ads. So if they detect any ads or tracking JavaScript, they will block those. So they'll stop those like a firewall, really. They'll stop those from being accessed, and they can block lots of basically any script or any domain. They can block and stop that from being loaded. Not only in this case, it can save you bandwidth. So Crystal promises to save you around 50% of your bandwidth by blocking a lot of these, but it can save your privacy as well while you're browsing around. That a lot of websites may be unaware of the tracking that they have in place through various JavaScript and ad servers, and what data is being collected. So you may want to use something like this if you feel that that data is being leached out into places that you don't know about. How do you feel about that?
I'm in two minds with AdBlockers. I fully understand why people will want to install them. You go to browse certain sites, you get half the page or more of ads. They're very intrusive. They'll follow your cursor around. They'll just pop up a video when you least want it. They can be very irritating from just a user experience perspective. But they also have some security disadvantages because companies they'll connect to advertising networks that don't always have many policies really to control the content. So sometimes you can be browsing a perfectly a legitimate site. So CNN, for example, a few years ago, they were found to be delivering malicious code, which is delivered through advertising networks.
Oh, really?
It's not their code. They
No.
weren't party to it. However, some of the companies that they allowed to advertise either directly or indirectly had loose policies, which therefore allowed malicious code to infect the users of a CNN website. So that's obviously, I'm in two minds, but also some people use them, and content producers, they are putting the content out there, and sometimes they should deserve to get something
absolutely
back. However, I would rather currently use an ad blocker, and then for the sites that I do like the content for, so whether that's Wired or Ars Technica, for example, I do like their content, so I'd happily pay for that. And Ars Technica are good. If you pay already, then they'll get rid of all the ads by default.
But actually,
a lot of
it's
other
not.
Newspapers won't. If I advertise I subscribe to the Financial Times as well, but they'll take my subscription as well as serve me adverts still.
And it's actually not, I don't have a problem with adverts at all. Being in marketing and advertising, I think it's fine. Adverts can be great, and they can actually be really useful in pointing you to things that you might need or that will be useful in your life or business. It's the additional weight that comes with it from a browsing point of view. It's just terrible what the abuse that a lot of these tracking JavaScript will use and use your bandwidth in a bad way, and then potentially the privacy angle as well. How they're going to use that. Yeah, I guess it's up to you. You use them if you feel that you want to protect it. Certainly, it can be worthwhile, and it can speed up your internet connection as well.
Yep, and there have been cases where but the problem, like with you're putting your faith in the VPN providers, you're also putting your faith in the person who created the ad blocking software. Because there have been cases where ad blocking software has become particularly popular, and then they will take money from companies to essentially whitelist them. We will allow you to show ads to our users who run our ad blocking software.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we better finish it there. We're running long, so I'm going to whip through a few other things. I just want to share a recent interview that went out from a lovely woman called Shayna Rattler. She is a leading expert in corporate sponsorship and influencer marketing. She really knows her stuff. If you're interested, basically what she's talking about is if you have any sort of audience, there are companies who will want access to that audience, but there are ways of managing that so you can benefit and the audience benefit, and obviously the corporation or company who are sponsoring you or providing money will benefit too. I highly suggest you have a listen to it. It's really good. There's lots of useful advice. I had a great time talking to Shayna. Also, do check out our events page. I'll show it now, but actually I don't know exactly when this is going to go out, so some of these may have gone by, but do have a look at our website, ratherinventive.com, and click on events, and you can see everything that's coming up, all of our events, talks, workshops, most of them free, to be honest. Go through and have a look and see what takes your fancy. And then finally, to round off, Seb, where can we find you online?
On Twitter at Seb Kinnaird. Also, just Google me, and my LinkedIn will probably come up. I'm more than happy to speak to anyone. If you've got any queries around security, I know from experience and working with some people in the security industry, they can make things sound overly complicated. And so if you're not sure about anything, I'd be happy to help.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And I'm at Ben Kinnaird on Twitter, or you can contact the show, hello@ratherinventive.com if you still use email. Sponsor for this episode is Inventive People. Make sure you use the code when you go to inventivepeople.co.uk. Inventive People is the code for 20% off. You can find the show notes for this episode on our website, ratherinventive.com/podcast. And if you want to support this podcast, you can do so just by letting other people know, either in person, or you can rate us on iTunes, or even signing up to our Inventive Marketing Club. Now, this is where we meet each other online to discuss a topic such as how to get 5-star reviews, YouTube stats, LinkedIn, and other helpful stuff. And that's for about just under £25 a month. I'll make sure the link is in the show notes. That's it. Thank you very much for your time, Seb. Really good talking to you, and I'll catch up with you personally soon, I'm sure. And to everyone else, thanks for listening.